very warm welcome to the latest edition of the Healthy Gospel Church podcast here, where we take a look at church life, where we take a look at culture, where we take a look at various things and just talk to interesting people. And they come no more interesting than my guest this morning. My guest this morning is Joe Barnard. Joe, welcome.
It's great to be here.
It's good to have you with us, Joe. Joe and I worked together for many years up there in the Highlands and Islands, where you were a fresh-faced loon. And you used to preach often for me at Smithton, and we really enjoyed that when you came in the evenings. So, Joe, it's great to have you.
Yeah, it's really good to be here.
So, if I were to ask a question, who is Joe Barnard? What would the answer be?
Well, I'm a husband, I'm a dad, I'm a pastor, and I also have a passion for discipling men. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the order of priorities, with, of course, being a Christian number one.
Okay. You're not from around here. Can you tell us where you were raised?
So born in Texas, but really raised outside New Orleans in Louisiana. But the odd thing in my life is there's lots of Americans passionate about Scotland that want to be here. I've had a different road in. God just seems to open doors here. And even when I try to go back, he brings me back to Scotland. So that's been the story of my life.
Okay, let's set an argument here. Is it New Orleans or New Orleans? Tell us the definitive answer.
Well, here, often New Orleans.
Uh-huh.
If you're proper Nolans.
Oh, wow.
But then New Orleans is also common.
In the great state of Louisiana.
That's right.
Tell us how you became a Christian.
I had parents who were divorced. I had a mom who was a believer and a woman of great prayer. So my earliest memories are hearing her pray, seeing God provide, which gave me a foundation that there's a Heavenly Father. In high school, I discovered something about my heart, my propensity to sin, started to feel the need for forgiveness. And so I think the cross really came into view in high school. And so I had a real wonderful moment I can look back to of just really appreciating God's holiness and His grace. But then at that point, wanted to study the Bible, and that's how I ended up in Scotland. So looking to build on that foundation of faith.
In high school and college in the US, did you have a mentor, or did you have an organization or church behind you that were, guiding you through the discipleship process? So, oddly enough, early 2000s, mid-2000s, I was very much wanting to do what now we call a ministry apprenticeship. And so I had to think it up myself. So I had a church plant, found my pastor. He was a mentor, had an academic mentor from the Christian university that was nearby. And so cobbled together what now happens all the time between Cornhill, ETS, churches like St. Andrews. But back then you had to try to discover it for yourself. Okay. You went to Baylor, is that correct?
I did, Baylor University.
What was your major in Baylor?
So it was a university scholar, which is an honors degree. Having been to Dingwall for a year, I was thinking about ministry.
What age were you when you went to HTC?
I parachuted in age 18.
18?
So
wow.
I'm pretty sure I'm the only person in the whole of the Bible Belt that if you asked your youth minister in 1999 where to go to study the Bible, he'd say Dingwall, Scotland. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so you went to HTC, you went back to Baylor. Would you say that a lot of your life, the kind of decisions that you made, the trajectory was interrupted? Because you went to St. Andrews after that, didn't you? Or your intention was to go to St. Andrews?
Yeah, I said something to my wife, Anna, that you should never say. I said, look, let's go to Scotland for a short master's. We'll just be gone for 9 months.
Okay.
And 9 years later, we were back in the States.
Yeah.
So I went to St. Andrews initially just to get a master's in theology, to go back toward the PCA, but then found out that there was a church in a place called Kiltarlity that was desperate and in need of someone to fill the pulpit, and sounded like a great opportunity.
Yeah. So again, I think a lot of life, maybe your life and everybody's life, it's not a plan. Like Kiltarlity just kind of happened. God opened the door and you went.
Absolutely. I think it was not at all, even though I'd spent a year in Scotland, there was never the thought in my early 20s that there's this place I want to go back to.
Yeah.
So there was no connection between Dingwall and, strangely enough, ending up in Kiltarlity, which is just about 10 miles from Dingwall. So I think, looking back, there's that invisible hand, there's that providence that does things that are utterly unexpected.
Okay. So again, you married up, you married Anna, and...
Absolutely, yeah.
Any children?
4 children, 2 of whom you baptized up in Kiltarlity. So we've got ages, 10 to about to turn 18 on Saturday. So we've got 3 teenagers.
Yeah. And what's your current ministry position?
So I am a minister, Holyrood Evangelical Church here in Edinburgh.
Okay. Let's unpack that because it's absolutely fascinating. You've had kind of 2 pastoral ministry jobs, if you like, one Kiltarlity, one in Edinburgh. Rural and urban, as the exam question would say, compare and contrast. Tell us what, the similarities and the differences are.
I think what's interesting about the modern world is in some ways it's not as dissimilar as you might expect. And so, there would have been an age where you probably shouldn't be doing rural ministry if you didn't know how to identify 6 or 7 different breeds of sheep, which I can't do. But, in this day and age, everybody's on YouTube, everybody's listening to modern media. And so even up in the Highlands, people are very caught up with the modern world. So in some ways, it's not that different. In other ways, though, I think, the challenges of rural ministry, you're fishing in a pond with very few fish. And so there's not a lot of drama that's going to happen. There's not a lot of people that are going to show up. The good side of that is you can go deep with relationships. You can be known and trusted by the community. Contrasting a place like Easter Road here in Edinburgh where there are endless people and people are going to find you if your doors are open and your lights are on, but nobody's going to know you. There's going to be no level of trust. And even schools that are nearby in today's day and age, they may not have that acceptance of the minister. And so tons more fish, there's an excitement, but whereas the people that you get to know in Kiltarlity, if you're there long enough, you're going to bury them. The people you get to know and love in Easter Road are gone in 12 months, and so you're having to replace them.
Because like your church is located in Montgomery Street. My guess is that there are probably at least twice as many people live in one street as live in the whole parish of Kiltarlity. Would that be fair?
Yes. I mean, there's just no comparison. Yeah.
Interesting what you said there about rural and urban. Folk very often talk about, rural culture. I say there is no such thing as one culture. And folk talk about, preaching to the culture. Any church that you go to will be multicultural. I mean, I'm guessing you're going to agree with me on that.
Yeah, I think what we didn't have up in the Highlands was much international diversity, which obviously is such a part of urban ministry in Scotland right now. But in terms of what, right now the 18-year-old is into in Kiltarlity and on like Leith Walk, I mean, it's the same music. They want the same clothes. They're watching the same sort of films. And so there is just this broad, modern culture that everybody's drinking from.
Yep. And even, we'll talk about men a bit later, but even, men as a unit, there are so many cultures within manhood, isn't there? Generational, I'm a baby boomer, you are a millennial. Are you a millennial?
Yeah, it depends on how you cut the numbers. So yeah, I don't feel like one. I don't really want to be one.
You think like a silent generation. You're so wise, Yet you look like Gen Z.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I mean, there is. It's hard to stereotype men or people, but nonetheless, there are such common features. I think how we think about self-understanding, expressive individualism. Again, you can't hide from this stuff, even if you're up in Orkney right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, I look at my own children, my own sons, and, they just think differently. They've been exposed to different stimuli and different ideas, philosophies. Revitalization, I mean, I knew the Kiltarlity situation well. It was, I think, at one time there were like 12 members there. It really needed to be revitalized. Holyrood again, I preached in Holyrood when I first started preaching. It'd be fair to say the demographic was a little bit in the older side. How do you approach revitalization? What's the kind of game plan when you go into a situation where a church needs revitalized?
Well, you're going to have to bring people with you. So insofar as you're able, I think you do really want them to be convinced that you care about them. That's really important because the truth is you're going to make some decisions they don't like. But if they like you, that helps. I think communication and vision is really essential. Making sure that first, you have a vision, but secondly, I think at Holyrood, we've tried really hard that vision isn't just something that the leaders know about, but that actually works its way down so that the people in the back row are hearing it too. And I think it's really difficult if you're in a church that doesn't see the need for change. That's hard. I think one of the things that both Kiltarlity, and it's been true at Holyrood too, they were at a place where they really felt like they needed to be led.
Yeah.
And that's hard to create in a people.
Sure.
But at the same time, if there's that sort of arrogance that we're just fine, it's really hard to bring about change.
Yeah.
But insofar as people think you care about them, you've got a vision they can buy into that they think's plausible, that they think's exciting, and then that there's actual some changes, some actual, I think critical actions are such a key word. And if you just keep taking small steps, it's amazing over time where you get to.
Small incremental steps. But both places, I guess, knew what they were getting when they hired you, in a sense that both were really keen to develop. There was a degree of momentum, and they invited you to join with them on that journey.
Well, we might say they were both really desperate. That was what was available.
Yeah, no. And then both places, I know you, James Fraser and Cultivating, guys like that, who were with you, and, these people wanted to see the place change, and Cultivating was transformed, yeah.
Yeah, no, I've greatly benefited from great elders, and I realize not every minister has that at his side.
Yeah. You did stuff in Cultivating, which I think was quite normal, but some folk would say was unusual. You got out and about, you met the guys from a shinty club, you got involved. I'm assuming shinty wasn't big in Louisiana, but you made an effort to understand it. I
think that's right. I think things are in a better place. I think if you go back and think 10, 20, 30 years ago, there was a little bit more church on the hill, minister up on the hill with them. And so I think more people realize the need to actually, come down the hill and be within the community. And there's actually more ways we can be involved with local community without somehow being corrupted by it. So, the basic things of being visible and present and making contacts.
Yeah. Let's talk about preaching. I really enjoy your preaching. I always have when you were in early days in Cultivating, starting out. What's your philosophy of preaching? Do you have one?
Yeah, I think I do. I think it's hard to limit it to something that you can just say in a minute. But I think one thing that I think is so important from someone we care about, Thomas Chalmers. Yeah. One of the things he always said is find the doctrine.
Yeah.
I think what he meant by that is you've got to find something solid enough, equally that's revolutionary enough that's actually worth saying. I remember the old TED stage, their big thing was always ideas worth sharing.
Sure.
And often I think you walk away from a sermon and think, you know what, I've heard that 1,000 times. That's not really insightful. And God's word is infinitely interesting.
Sure.
And so, it should be detonating week by week and people thinking, my worldview is shifting. And so I think sometimes we get lazy and we don't drill down and find that truth that's really worth preaching and worth coming out to hear about. So I think, among other things, I think always looking for, what is it? What is the thing that's going to help people exit the modern world and understand what it is to live this Christian life right now?
Yeah, you've always got a bridge into contemporary society. In these early days, can you remember the one bit of advice I gave you about preaching?
Yeah, I use it all the time, David. I don't know.
You were great preaching, but there was one little issue.
Yeah, I had to land the airplane. Yeah. I was crashing. So I still often at the end, I've got like the landing, on my outline. So I think of you just about every week with that one. I'm still learning how to do it, but it's not as many crash landings as I used to have.
No, that's so funny because, Joe, you were a great preacher, 9 out of 10. And I remember one saying, Joe, what would bump you up to a 10 would be work on your landings, because sometimes it was like an emergency landing. You'd go from full flow to in the terminus in like 2 seconds. Just glide in a little bit more,
Yeah.
But we're always learning, aren't we?
Oh, well, something else. I remember you saying, quoting Lee Trevino, the great golfer who used to go every summer whenever and, get a coach and say, teach me how to play golf.
Back to Florida. Teach me
and
how to play.
And I think, I definitely feel that. It's always okay. I got to learn this skill. it's so worthwhile to always be investing in.
Yeah. Also, we're going to talk about this book later, The Road Back to God. One of the things that strikes me about you and many preachers of your generation, Corey Brock, guys like that, is you read very well. What's your philosophy of reading? I mean, do you just read new stuff? Do you read old stuff? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I've always tried to read with three aims. Obviously, you need your theological foundation. Some guys only have that. The other two would be, I always think in terms of society, and I think in terms of the human heart. And so as well, trying to read things that really give perspective on the world that surrounds us, but then equally just trying to really get an anthropology, like what does it mean to be a human being? And often that part, novels, poetry, history, fills that in. Some of the great classics have such an understanding of the human person. So I think it's always trying to triangulate. And, if you kind of have those three conversations in your head, it so helps you then come into the text with something to understand it, but then apply it.
Yeah, because, reading your books, listening to your preaching, you're going to the old wells, you're quite a lot of the Greek stuff, the Greek classics, Plato, this book is a lot about Plato's cave. You talk about the old Scottish guys, Chalmers, Candlish. You talk about, some of the more modern thinkers as well. Charles Taylor, obviously everybody's read him and informs the way we think. Carl Trueman. Would you advise young guys, again, I mean, you're also fixed in what's called the Western canon, the books that everybody should read. What advice would you give to younger guys and girls about reading?
Yeah, I think definitely don't just be a podcast listener. Do listen to podcasts, but that'll do one thing for you and it won't do something else.
Okay, what will it do and what won't it do?
I mean, I think there's any number of great conversations and you get lots of little insight. But in terms of deep perspective, there's a different kind of perspective you get when you work through a book and have to labor through a system of thought. And so I would just say, balance those two things. And then I would also say, again, go between new and old. But read things that are great.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good books, but it's just worth your effort to find the thinkers, whether they're Christian or not, that are great thinkers and great writers. And again, that'll take you further in your thoughts than the stuff that's just rehashing what the great guys have said.
Yeah, because, through common grace, folk are not Christians. If anyone's come out with a great thought, it is God's thought. They may not realize that or acknowledge it, but it is God's thought.
Definitely.
Yeah. Let's talk about your most recent book. You've done a few books, The Road Back to God, Faith for Men, Dissatisfied by the Modern World. Tell us a little bit, I know you're really interested in ministry among men. You've got cross-training. We'll talk about that later. Tell us how you got started in this journey. What is your burden for the contemporary man in Scotland or wherever?
Yeah, this goes back to the Highlands. I think seeing young men come into the church, having the chance to preach to them, having the chance to meet with them, maybe weekly to do reading the Bible together, but not seeing much transformation in this sense that there's something suffocating about our modern environment, that it just doesn't give us the oxygen we need to grow. And so that raising this big question, how do you set men up? Insofar as we're able, recognizing it's the Holy Spirit, but what can we do to not set them up to fail, which seems to be where they are right now in most cases, but instead to set them up to be able to grow. And I think men, it's a confusing age for everyone, but it's an age where there's just so many men that they're frustrated, they're maybe angry, they don't understand the modern world, and that drives them to feed off some sources that can be really dangerous and toxic. And I think a lot of the other men's ministry, it's often, I always think it should have the label, for dummies attached to its material. It's just, it doesn't feed the need of men. So this is an attempt to fill out and to provide some resources to these guys that are looking for advice, they're looking for counsel, and to get them off of the Jordan Peterson and onto something that actually takes them to Christ and to the sources of real, genuine spiritual transformation.
We all know someone who doesn't know Jesus yet. We know God desires everyone to know Him. We know He hears our prayers. What if every one of us prayed for 10 people we know? What if our praying opens the door to us sharing about Jesus? Jordan Peterson, would you say he takes guys so far and then he can't go any further? What's your analysis of his thinking?
I think that's right. Whether it's your Tom Holland, your Douglas Murray, your Jordan Peterson, your David Brooks, all of these thinkers, they're good in that they raise questions.
Sure.
And we need people to be thinking.
Yeah.
And they even make appealing things like the Old Testament.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
But they don't take you far enough in the sense of understanding that you can't fix yourself.
Yeah.
And that deep understanding of transformation coming through the person of Christ and His work on the cross. So this particular book, a couple of years ago, I had this sense of, it just seemed like there was something happening. And all these young men were interested in faith. And there wasn't a resource that you would give that guy that's shown up to your church that's been listening to whatever podcast to get him on the road toward understanding the gospel. And I thought, a specific resource for that group was needed. And so that's what, kind of inspired this book.
Yeah. Everybody's talking these days about the quiet revival, a movement largely or significantly among Gen Z guys. Their interest in religion and spirituality is peaked. They're stimulated by it. Number one, are you seeing that in Holyrood? Are you seeing guys wandering into church? And what's behind it?
Yeah. I think it's definitely, there's a definite change. So anybody who's been in Scotland, this would be true in the States too, but it'd be even more visible here, I think. None of us were seeing guys in their 20s just show up on their own initiative, 10, 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. Now, they're not coming in droves.
Sure.
But they are coming.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, I was in Motherwell doing a men's event. There were some folk from a church in Paisley. Since Charlie Kirk's death, they've had, I think they said 31 men show up. That wasn't happening.
Yeah.
Certainly in places like Paisley. So there is something in the air that's different. In terms of what's driving it, this is where we could spend a lot of time. The world is changing. Put aside the sort of stuff like COVID, I think if you look at someone like Richard Reeves and his work on just the sort of statistical changes in the world, it is true that increasingly, this sounds strange, but it's becoming a women's world in the sense they're outperforming men at university, they're getting graduate degrees, they're excelling in life where men are failing. And I think a lot of, among other things, that leaves men often frustrated and sometimes angry. Those are dangerous emotions.
Sure.
So I'm not at all justifying the way the world should look, but there are a lot of men that all of a sudden, they don't know what their opportunities are. They've not had fathers. The modern world is really confusing. It's empty of spiritual value. There's a void that is within them, and that can lead them, to some pretty unhealthy places and listening to some pretty unhealthy voices. But it can also be an opportunity for the church to take up their questions and to take them on a different journey.
Yeah. Is there a danger of typecasting what a good man is in healthy male identity? He is, an ex-Marine, he's tough, he eats raw meat, he's big. I know a lot of guys who are, gentle, they cook, they're into design. Are they less of a man than your type A big personality?
I think there's all the sort of secondary things, which, men can incarnate their masculinity in a lot of different ways. There's the opposite problem, though, of never giving men any sense of direction on what it means to be a man. And I think without any of those superficial markers, I think it's really important to talk to men about the importance of aspiring to marriage, which in most cases, not all cases, is going to be part of your life plan. Aspiring to family and what it looks like to become a responsible father. For men to understand that to be a man is to have responsibility, which means becoming someone that others can depend upon. None of that stuff is strong versus, weak,
Sure.
or, liking art or liking hunting. That's all at a much more basic level of just, if you're a man, probably life is going to be composed of these type things. And I would add into that mix talking to men early about the importance of taking responsibility at church. Even aspiring one day to be qualified to hold an office like elder.
Like, a lot of young guys just don't want that. They don't want to take office in church. They don't want to take responsibility. What's behind that?
Well, I don't think there's anything new about men shirking responsibility. I think, you can see any number of boyish types through all of the ages of guys pursuing self-fulfillment, pursuing their own sort of vain desires and not responsibility. At the same time, I think we've lost our ability to articulate and talk and even our courage to talk to men directly, that to be a man is to be responsible. Like, if we're going to just make it as basic as it is. And so if you're going to be a mature man, then you need to be aspiring to, again, the kind of character and wisdom such that you can lovingly care for others. And that's going to take its place, within the home. That's going to take its place within the church. And so I think that is something that we need to help men recover, especially those who are committed as Christians and willing to take their guidance from the Bible.
Okay. So, I hear some of my friends who are girls, and maybe they're saying, yeah, but sure, women have to be responsible as well. Sure, they've got to step up. What's the difference?
Yeah, I think anybody who can think about a father and a mother should know these are not interchangeable parts, that there is fundamentally something different. It's not to say that there's nothing nurturing about a father. It's not going to say that there's nothing about a mother that exerts a sort of authority in the home. But I think these roles, they are different, and what they exhibit even to children is different, and the quality of love. The love that a father gives and a mother is slightly different. And so I think to be able to talk distinctly about what does it mean to be a father, how should men aspire to have a certain kind of character that will earn the trust of their children, that will help to set an order even within their home. These are conversations we need to be willing to have. And I think we'll have to have them on the other side too, and help women recover their sense of what that means.
Yeah. Do you like the term complementarian? Do you think it's a good term, helpful? I do.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think it's a beautiful term in the sense that complementing each other is, recognizing that there's strengths on both sides, that these come to their full effect when they're put together.
Yeah.
And I think certainly there's nothing more evident from the first pages of the Bible that man and woman are created to complement and to do something together that they could not do independently.
Yeah. How do we guard against overheating? You think of Doug Wilson and folk like that. I've experienced a lot of toxic patriarchy in the last few weeks and months. Guys that have actually been abusive. There's been a couple of cases where folk have actually gone to jail because, they've been driven by this noble, as they see it, view of patriarchy. Where do you cross the line between responsible and loving into being oppressive and dominant?
I think power is so dangerous. And I think when notions of power corrupt notions of, say, authority, then that's dangerous. There is a kind of authority that we see exhibited through, for example, Jesus himself, which is manifest through meekness and sacrificial love, that's not at all oppressive, but that inspires people to want to follow. And I think it's so important that we take our template from that picture and not from any of the other traditional models of masculinity, which are all about strength and oppression and getting my way. So you can find those models, but we really need to filter our notions of manhood through what we see in the cross.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit, again, I'll show it one more time, The Road Back to God. Talk about the book. Tell me, what did you set out to do in writing this book?
I think men need a couple of things. One, and we're talking evangelistically. This is an evangelistic book. So this is not a book trying to make sense of the modern world. It's not trying to give men a notion of masculinity. This is trying to take guys who are spiritually lost, give them a path so they can intelligently understand our faith, God willing, make a profession and join a church. I think they need two things, though. One is they need to detox from the modern world. So evangelism often jumps right in with, say, a gospel or the person of Jesus. That's not where a lot of guys are. I think guys, some just need to begin to think, ask bigger questions. Some guys need to be stung by the truth. They need to have a moral framework that makes them fearful of their propensities to sin, even if they don't call it sin yet.
You've got a great phrase there. You talk about this, a cold wash, a cold bath. They need that shot. Carry on. So.
Yeah. So, the first 4 or 5 chapters are really just trying to prepare guys to where they're finally in a spot where they're looking for the answer. I think it's so important most of the time, you got to agitate the problem. And so a lot of it's kind of agitating the problem. And then, of course, the solution, there's nothing new to serve there. They need to know about Jesus, who he is. They need to know about the cross. They know about the resurrection. But even all of that can be communicated in a way that demonstrates its contemporary relevance. So all the time trying to take the old truth, apply it in a modern context, but to lead men. I think part of what the book is trying to do is so many guys think that they can have truth on tap. They can listen to it on their podcast. They can listen to it on YouTube. Guys need to find their way into evangelical churches. And part of why I wrote this book is too many religiously interested men are going to the Orthodox, they're going to the Roman Catholics, and they're skipping us.
Well, let me pause there. I was going to ask you about that. Why do you think that is the case? Do they like, in both in Rome and Eastern Orthodoxy, authority, sense of transcendence? What's pulling them there? And what, again, like Jordan Peterson, they're maybe stopping before the destination?
I think one of the biggest things, they're looking for roots. Guys are unrooted. In our modern world, we have no historical connection. Guys are looking forward. They do not like the trajectory. Well, if you're not going to look forward, which is for a long time where men have been looking to change the world, well, you look backward. And so you're looking for tradition. You're looking, like you said, for transcendence, for substance. And, us evangelicals, we are disadvantaged in the sense you step into our church and you don't see a robe always. You don't smell incense. You don't hear Latin. And that stuff has a kind of thrill for a lot of guys. I think we have to realize we've then got to work harder. We've got great traditions too. You look at the Scottish Church, I think guys here should be going deep in their own past. But that's not evident necessarily if they just cross our door and step into our churches. So we've got to find a way to, I think, brandish our own tradition and be unashamed of it. Not so guys will stay there, but they'll see the kind of authenticity that we have.
Yeah, because if you look at, even the Scottish Presbyterian tradition and the great writers, and even you go back to Knox, I often listen to tour guides, St. Giles there, Knox's grave, and, he's a misogynist, he's repressive, he set Scotland back years. That's not the truth. The great disruption fathers. I think many of our younger guys don't talk about these folk because they, what we call the TRs, the truly reformed guys have hijacked that and said, that's our territory, that's not your territory. But what you've done, what others have done is they synthesize, they read the old and the new. You get a guy like Keller. Keller's steeped in the old stuff. He's steeped in Jonathan Edwards. He's steeped in, older traditions. And it's to get our ministers to realize, and preachers, the old stuff is good. And young guys like that. I'm always seeing a day when, don't do this at home, folks, when folk are putting pews back into churches. And
I know.
Because that's what the young guys like, let's sing psalms without music again,
Yeah.
And we're not going to go there, right? You kind of see the attraction of that, don't you?
Well, that's right. I think it's a moment where, we need to do a good job telling our story. A lot of the battle culturally has been over who gets to tell history. And without ignoring, there's plenty of blemishes. You look at someone like Tom Holland and the way Dominion, all of a sudden, again, making Christianity plausible because it's not as evil as we thought. The same needs to be done in Scotland for Scots where they can see actually, wait, there's this really interesting person who revolutionized a nation and actually pushed it to the forefront of modern society. Oh yeah, John Knox. Maybe we shouldn't, make him into a car park.
Sure. Where do you get modern education? Why is every a school in every district because of John Knox? You look at the modern social work movement. You look at Guthrie, you look at Chalmers.
Yes.
You look at hospitals, you've got St. Bartholomew's. Well, saying, that gives a hint, doesn't it? All the universities. Who started all this stuff? It was us. Yeah. That I've just come across your phrase. I wrote it in an ice bath for the indifferent. I love that expression. Sin. You mentioned a lot about sin. That's counterintuitive. A lot of evangelicals don't use the word sin. They talk about failures. They talk about disappointing God. You put a lot of words into sin, and one of the issues you raise is it's an interesting concept. So how do you talk about sin to a contemporary culture?
So why do people love, we keep talking about Jordan Peterson, but he's a great example. Part of what guys find in him is a moral vocabulary. They find a moral framework that does a better job diagnosing their experience, that you don't always aspire and get your dream. Life's hard. Life's full of suffering. They want a framework.
Sure.
Traditionally, person after person, theologian after theologian have said that the one doctrine that you can prove empirically is sin.
Sure.
So if we're looking for something that can truly do a better job making sense of, again, this propensity to self-destruct, we're not going to find it in psychology because they're going to medicalize it all.
Yeah.
We need something with moral contours. And the word sin is difficult because all of the cultural baggage, and that's why in the book I go back to some of the Hebrew terms because they're actually each insightful. And so to think about it, the one that people would be most familiar with would be something like hatat, where it's missing the mark.
Yeah.
But there's a virtue ethic there whereby you say, there's a mark that we're intended to hit. We fall short of that, and then you can layer on some of the consequences. But that idea that there's a telos, there's an end, there's a goal. Yeah. Again, that's a framework that begins to make more sense than just to say to someone, you're a sinner.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about, pasha, avan, moral trespass, pollution, all that stuff resonates. And it's stuff in the Bible that people find a little bit scary because it might offend folk. I find that's what young people want to hear. They want to hear about sin. They want to hear about hell. They want to hear about suffering. They want to ask the big questions and not just have a gel version of Christianity and indeed evangelicalism. Yeah.
That's right. And I think the world's becoming more porous again, to use a Charles Taylor phrase. I mean, we've been in this kind of buffered world where we're all secular and, we've acted as if nobody believes in the spiritual, when actually, no, the world's become porous again and people all around us actually have all kinds of crazy views about spiritual stuff.
Sure.
And so we need to not just be acting like we're speaking to the hardened atheist. Some of those are out there. Mm-hmm. We're also talking to people who have crystals and, are going to seances and exploring, Jewish Kabbalah, all kinds of weird stuff. And so to realize, even talking about the devil or Satan, he doesn't sound as implausible to a lot of people as we think. But we're still stuck in sort of the sort of modernist mindset when actually we're in new terrain with our culture.
Well, I was reading in The Spectator this week about the modern occult, the new president of Argentina, even the occult references in AI, modern technology, Halloween stuff. There is a modern occult. Folk are really into spirituality of it in the dark side.
Yeah, exactly. And so we don't want to lean into it unnecessarily, but we don't want to be embarrassed. I think for a long time we've acted as if, this is unfortunate that we still have to talk about things like angels and the devil, when the truth is, again, the air of skepticism, it's in some places, but in other places, they're beyond us. They're back in paganism where I met a guy recently who's just come out of spending a long period passionately pursuing Norwegian gods. I mean, how odd to think, in East Edinburgh, there's this guy, who taking Odin seriously.
Well, you want to meet him on a Thursday, don't you?
But these are the people on our streets.
Yeah.
It's a different conversation with that guy than the sort of person that you're often imagining yourself and taking the apologetic, course to try to talk to about scientism.
Yeah. That's fascinating. And we forget that there are guys, and I guess girls as well, who are spending hours on the internet and investigating these rabbit runs of obscure spiritualities. It's absolutely everywhere. In the book, you've got a whole chapter on Jesus. Fascinating character. Do you think he's our, if you pardon the expression, trump card?
We can't get around him, and we shouldn't try to get around him, and we shouldn't certainly be embarrassed by him. That's where, at the end of the day, I think with this book, if it's evangelistic, it's got to take people to where they can think about Jesus. Now, I think what was interesting writing the book, again, if it was 20 years ago, I probably would have spent a lot of time trying to ground like historical proofs, all of that sort of thing. I think people are much more aware right now to sort of jump into some doctrine. So I think you can go to an orthodox framework for thinking about him more quickly than maybe in the past.
Yeah, and I mean, it ends, you see, repent, submit, progress, attach, and follow. So where's the end point of the Christian life? A guy starts thinking, he starts asking the big hard questions. He's interested in Jesus. He's on his own in his sitting room, trawling the internet. Where does he end up? Obviously in Holyrood Evangelical Church. Where does he end up? What's the journey?
I want to lead guys to evangelical churches. Yeah. That's where I think so often our evangelism has gone wrong because we've not prioritized that. Whether it's the big stadium stuff of the Billy Graham era, even some of the Christianity Explored where you detach it from the community, that's where they're really going to have to discover what it means to be a Christian. And so the hope with the book, it's simply, like you said, the guy who's pursuing it with a casual interest on his own at least gets a robust taste for what it is with a strong call to go and find himself at church. And then hopefully within that community, he can go further in this journey of faith. Okay.
So you're big in church. You've pastored church. Church is your thing. But you've got a lot of side hustle, cross-training. Tell us a little bit about that. And is it really a side hustle? How does it connect with the church?
So, it's, in my mind, it's part of this great effort to re-evangelize Scotland. I think it's really exciting to see what's improved. I think there's a lot more churches that have shifted from the back foot to the front foot in terms of disciple making. Training has become, I think Scotland's a model, to be honest, in terms of how to train ministers. Church planning, lots of different groups doing it. There's still some gaps, and I think one of the big gaps is we're not going to have enough ministers for a while unless God does something tremendous, which means we're going to need great elders. And when I think back to Kiltarlity, if you ask, what did God use to transform that church? I'm not going to raise my hand. It wasn't me. It was a great elder.
Yeah.
That's a model that we could replicate, where there are small communities that aren't yet big enough for a full-time minister. But if they had an elder with vision, with character, with leadership, who knows the sort of transformation that over 20 years might happen. And I think there's a lot of villages and hamlets that might need that kind of model to really reach a sustainable place. And so I view cross-training, we're not doing a great job discipling a lot of the men on the ground who aren't in hubs like Edinburgh and Glasgow.
Yeah.
And so how do you bring discipleship to them that will result in transformation so they can become the fathers, they can become the husbands, and they can become the elders that Scotland needs?
Do you think, Proverbs 31 are the hallmarks of the virtuous woman? What is the male equivalent? I'm maybe thinking the qualifications for office. Have you thought about that? The male equivalent of Proverbs 31?
Yeah, I think the qualifications are interesting. But they're not really comprehensive. And in some ways, this might sound strange to people, I think they're a low bar. I don't think they have the fullness of what is after. I think it's difficult to locate that passage, like Proverbs 31, that you would say for men. But I think there's a lot of ground, not just in Genesis with Adam, but actually as you begin to look at the Abraham, Isaac, Jacob stories, not these men as necessarily exemplars of positive masculinity, but even by their failures, they're pointing toward what it means to be a father as they grow, what it means to lead within a family. And through their foibles, you see some dramatic transformation. I think a figure like Judah, who starts as low as it gets. There's a terrifying, chapter with Tamar, but by the end, he's taking responsibility. Yeah. He's willing to offer himself and sacrifice himself for the good of the family. He's seeing the bigger need. There's pictures of what it looks like to be a man if you pay attention to these Hebrew narratives. And so I think there's a real call to reread this story, because actually if you put Genesis next to the contemporary literature, ancient people would be shocked by how domesticated the stories are.
Yeah. Again, you've got my interest going there. So I'm interested in your approach to Old Testament narrative there. You're not taking maybe a strict redemptive historical line, I think I like what you're doing in that you take an Old Testament passage and you're seeing there are legitimate examples of how to live there. Some guys would say, no, you don't, you can get that in Aesop's Fables. I sense that you would see it as a double-sided coin. There are examples that we can follow, but there's also a redemptive historical pointing to the greatest man, Jesus.
I think the most traditional model of exegesis is believe in coherence, that there can be multiple levels of meaning in a single text, always grounded in the historical, but from the historical comes the redemptive historical, but equally what you could put Augustine, you could put Spurgeon, and you could put Calvin, they would also find ethical or moral instruction too. Sure. How to grow up in godliness. And so in these stories, and not always that they're perfect characters, but in their failure, you also get lessons for what it looks like to grow in godliness. So I think to not find that in the text, people need that. Where else are they going to go for it?
Yeah. Joe, thank you so much. It's interesting. A lot of the feedback we get from the podcast, some folks say, it's really long, 45 minutes. Other folks say it's too short. There's guys out there, girls listening to 2-hour podcasts, so do you think that says something about the age of preaching, the age of information?
It's certainly a moment where people are willing to listen to verbal content at length. Not many of us would have seen that as part of the trajectory. So I think if they're not listening to us, guys, this hurts, but that might be on us and not on them right now.
Yeah, that's the most listened to podcast in Scotland. Thousands listen to us. Joe, thank you so much. I could talk to you all day. Continue a conversation we started 15 years ago. Thank you for coming, and we wish you every blessing in cross-training. Where can folk access the cross-training material?
They can go to the website, XTrainingMinistries.com. They can find the books, at any of your booksellers. So I'd start there.
Okay. Listeners, thank you so much for joining us. I'm sorry we're not giving you 2 hours. If we've given you 46 minutes, we are sorry for boring you. But I hope you have found our conversation today as interesting as I have. So please keep with us in this series of podcasts. And we look forward to hearing from you and seeing you next week. Thank you. Have a great day.